working on the Riley again. I think I mentioned I've got a pinched nerve in my neck. It's an old injury that comes back from time to time. I think when I was trying to move a massive pile of firewood out there, and I strained it again, which means I haven't been able to do much this week. I've just been sitting quietly. All you can do is wait for the pain to go away. I guess the nerve just needs time to recover. But I'm just doing a little bit tonight. I have the paint on the petrol tank has dried. It's a little bit rough in places. The spray can wasn't behaving, so it hasn't come out perfect. But I actually quite like it. It makes it look a bit less new. So that'll be fine for now. I've made the fuel pickup tubes. So the way I did that was I made them both the same length. They're silver soldered into these rather than soft soldered. I don't want there to be any danger of those tubes dropping out. So they're pressed in and then silver soldered into place. Little bit of Loctite on the thread there. Apparently the blue Loctite is fuel proof, so that's fine. And I had to decide how much I wanted the reserve to be, and I looked up some numbers, and typically they say it's around 15% of the tank, which for a 7-gallon tank works out to be about a gallon, so that seemed about the right amount. So I poured 5 litres of fuel in, which is just over a gallon, a UK gallon, and then I trimmed the main pickup to be, I threaded it in and figured out where the fuel level came to and then cut it off at that point. So the cut off one is my main pickup, and the one that goes all the way to the bottom is the reserve. So that's all nicely in place. I've screwed the fuel pipes down with the little clips there. This isn't actually bolted in place. I haven't done these up, but it's just sitting there. The good thing is with the body off, you can get the tank in without removing the straps entirely, which is quite handy. These are all done up. Don't seem to be any leaks, which is good. There's a connection down there. That's not leaking. Got the battery temporarily hooked up, and I've got the fuel pump going. And initially I had it set to main, and I was wondering why it wasn't picking up any fuel. But of course, I'd only put 5 litres in and cut the pipe, so it was below the main level. So switched it over to reserve, turned the pump on, and after a few seconds, it sucked the fuel up and filled up the float bowl. Because I haven't used the car for a while or run it, the needles were stuck, so then the carburetors promptly overflowed. I had to tap them with a little plastic hammer just to get them to seat again. And I think now, I'm always a bit wary of this when you've had petrol spill everywhere and you've got a little switch, but should be okay. So the fuel pump should stop ticking. The carbs aren't leaking fuel everywhere, which is good. I think the pump should stop completely if there are no leaks, so I may need to check it for leaks, but that seems pretty good. So it definitely picked up the fuel. That was no trouble, and it's filled up the float bowl, and that all seems good. So I'm just waiting for the petrol that spilled to kind of evaporate off a bit, and then I might just try firing the engine just to make sure it goes. And that is then done. I haven't swapped over the oil gauge yet. I'll nick the oil gauge from the little generator engine because it's a bit more vintage. I want to see if I can change the bezel on it, because this one is black. The rest of the bezels on mine are chrome. But probably doesn't really matter, but I'm sure I can restore that gauge. And So next is the front guard stays. I'm going to use the short guards rather than big long ones, just because they're going to be lighter and easier to make, and I quite like how they look. It also just gets easier around this side, around the exhaust, so you don't have things clashing. And I have ordered some lamps, about $950 I think it ended up costing, and I've ordered a switch for the indicators, a period blue lamp for the high beam indicator, which I have to have by law. I've ordered little Lucas side marker lights that have 2 bulb holders, so there's a white and a orange for indicators on the front, and at the rear I had already bought some lamps. So in here I've got various bits and pieces, including reflectors, couple of different styles of reflector. I'll need those. And these are, they should be open. These were the lamps I'd previously bought, stop lamps. So these are correct period, and I just like them better than the sort of Lucas pork pie type ones, which seem to be a bit later. So these are going to be the stop lamps, which will probably be mounted here. But when I looked on the site, I realized they also sell these with an amber lens. So instead of trying to make these flash, which actually turns out to be a little bit tricky, I ordered 2 more with the amber lenses, and I will make a plate that kind of wraps around here, and these will bolt to that. So I'll have stop and indicator, same style. These also have the number plate illumination, and number plates are quite interesting. They recently updated the rules here. They didn't change the law, but they updated the rules for when a car goes for a warrant about what's allowed with number plates, and they were going to make it a lot stricter about what they'd let people get away with. But they rolled that back because apparently there were all sorts of problems with it. One of the rules was you couldn't mount a number plate vertically, it had to be horizontal. And they discovered that that means on a lot of trailers where people have mounted the number plates vertically on the rear guards, that wasn't going to work. So I don't know what they're doing about that. I've looked up the rules around number plates, and it does kind of mention what you can and can't do. You were allowed vinyl or paint or stuck on front number plates, but it doesn't say anything about rear ones, because traditionally the plates on this would be on the side of the tail. I'm not allowed to do that here. So the plates are probably going to have to go, will have to go down here. I don't know what the story is on a car like this where the plate is only visible from one side effectively. It's visible from the rear, but I don't know quite what the rules are for that, and there don't seem to be any guidelines. That's when things get tricky. When there are no guidelines, the problem is you'll get someone making them up. And if you go for a warrant and they decide they don't like it, you've got no rules to point to say that they're wrong. And of course, people in those kind of positions are never wrong. So yeah, we'll have to see what the story is for that. What I did on the Austin 7 is mounted it here, or that's where it would mount. These are those, I think they're Lucas ST38s, something like that. Those always seem a little bit later to me, sort of late 30s, whereas these seem to be a bit more late 20s, early 30s. Here's my number plate illumination lamp for the Austin. I'll need to do the same on the Riley. The other thing you could do is, like on the, is it the Nippies or the Speedies? I can't remember which Austin 7 it is. They actually have the number plate mounted up here because there isn't really anywhere to put it on the back. But I'd prefer not to do that. The other thing I will need to do is I will have to have a high stop light, because that's nothing to do with the vintage car rules or the constructed car rules. That's actually in the normal rules for any cars in New Zealand. If they're first registered here after 1991, I think it is, they're supposed to have them. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to build that into the tail somewhere or into the boot lid. I'm not quite sure how yet, but I bought some bulb holders and I'll make a little aluminium fairing. I don't want something that looks really obviously bolted on, so I'll see what I can come up with there. And yeah, that's it. So I'm just going to give this a quick start because it hasn't run for a little while, just to circulate the oil a little bit. I don't like running it for short lengths of time. At the moment there's nothing in the cooling system, but I do just want to make sure the fuel system works. So I'll probably do that. I don't think I'll film that. I don't want to worry about filming. I just want to run it and make sure nothing leaks or catches fire. Well, that was good. It started right up. I let it run for a little while. And then I went to shut it off and it wouldn't shut off on the button. This is one of the things with a magneto-driven car. The only way to stop it is to short out the magneto. It turns out my earth had fallen off. So I had to grab another piece of wire and short it out from here to ground to actually stop the engine. I suppose I could have turned off the fuel and let it run out of fuel as well, but that would probably take a little while. You can hear the pump ticking away every so often. I'm never quite sure if these should completely stop or not. But there's no leaks that I've noticed so far, because there are a few joins in the system, of course, so any one of these is potential for leaking. But I think with these brass fittings with the olives, I think they always tighten up quite nicely. They are designed to be removable. I don't know how many times, but no, that seems good. And there's no fuel leaking out of the fuel tank, which is handy. So I'll turn that off. Yeah, started right up with no choke, probably because the carbs were flooded, so there was plenty of petrol in there. And it's the master switch for the battery. Very good. It's been sitting for probably half an hour while I've been doing other things, and no leaks so far, so that's good. I have shut the fuel off at the petrol tank though, and I've done something I've been meaning to do for ages, which is shorten the brackets that the headlamps mount to. Those little metal plates. I was trying to keep them away from the back of the bonnet because these otherwise end up always being dinged, but you can get little rubber corners that go in the bonnet corners, so I think a couple of those will stop that happening. But I wanted to move them back because I think it looks better. It's more in line with the historical photos, and also it means I'll be able to fit the diagonal bracing closer to the center of the front guards. So there'll be a sort of diagonal brace that goes across like that on each side, and that's there to stiffen the front guards. Otherwise, apparently they are prone to wobbling, rattling around. So you'll see a lot of cars in period have that sort of diagonal bracing. And yeah, that was about it. That was just a small job. Fuel system seems good. No leaks so far. I've disconnected the battery. I've put it back on its little trickle charger. And I've got some fuel in it. I may end up having to do something different with this. Oh no, you can see You can sort of see the level. I can see it. You can just see where it's slightly shiny, where it's wet. About there. So that's a gallon of fuel in there. Which, yeah, it kind of makes sense. What I may end up doing is I'll progressively fill the tank, and this is K&S modeling tube, so it means you can get brass tube that slides inside each other. I may make some little rings, and it's quite thin walled, so I don't want to machine it, but if I make small rings, I can soft solder the rings along the tube at each of the levels. So you know, 1 to 7 gallons, I guess. So I might do that. Need to go through my box of brass bits and pieces, or copper would work. Copper would look quite nice, actually. So I've got lots of little offcuts of copper tubing. I think that's too small. So, but inside here I've got brass. That might be it. No, that's the same diameter. That's 2 up. You get the idea anyway. Yeah, you can see as a hobbyist, I keep every little tiny scrap of this stuff because it's hard to get and expensive. So, I think that's the same. Of course, it's always the one size you don't have. It's the one you need. But I may just have to order that online. I'm pretty sure they'll do copper in that sort of diameter. Oh, little fantails back. I did find one of those dead in here one day, so one of them obviously came in and didn't make it out. So hopefully this one will make it out. I think the one that died got too caught up in cobwebs. Bugger off. Silly little things. Yeah, I'm pleased with how that's come out. I think that looks quite neat. It's the next day and my fuel tank all looks good. There's no leaks, which is really good. I do have to remember to put some valve master in there. So this stuff is normally for boosting the octane, but it also protects against ethanol. I'm pretty sure this is non-ethanol fuel, but I'll put some of that in there just to be safe. And I figured out why I sometimes find dead birds in here, because my little fantail friend is stuck up inside the vent. I don't know if you can see that, but he's been going round and round in there all night, I imagine. And because it's spinning, he can't get out. So I managed to stop it by standing with this, poking that up in there. And then the idiot got out and then just flew straight back up into there. So I need to stop that again. And I don't have any ladders tall enough for me to get up there to put any sort of mesh or anything in the way to stop the birds doing that. So I'm not quite sure what I can really do there. But I'll try and get this one out anyway. He must be absolutely knackered. He's been in there all night going round and round in circles. Just a very small amount of work on the Riley today. I'll make another film for the little generator engine. I've also been cleaning up so there's less stuff all over the place. I've been putting things away on shelves. But good news is no leaks from the petrol tank overnight on the Riley. So that all looks good. And I swapped over the oil pressure gauge. So this is the oil pressure gauge that came on the generator motor. It's just a more vintage gauge. And what I ended up doing is taking that off, and the bezel was painted black, so I cleaned the black paint off, got it back to bare metal, and I have zinc plated it, no, nickel plated it. I'm not sure how well that's working. There is definitely some metal there, but I've given it a bit of a polish. I didn't go too far. I don't want it all nice and new looking shiny. I want it to look new old, if that makes sense. So I think I sort of got that look. And hopefully that'll work fine. And I think that's it on the Riley today. I still need to make the guard supports. That'll be the next job. That might be tomorrow's job. So yeah, that's where we're at with the Riley. It's another day out in Big Shed. It's actually only been half a day because we've been to a barbecue at our neighbour's place, our local community where we live. There's a, I guess you'd call it a village hall if it was the UK, but it's a hall that's been there since 1914. It's owned by the community, whatever that means, but it needs earthquake strengthening, so we're doing a whole bunch of fundraising events and bits and pieces to raise money for this hall to get it fixed. So we went over to meet the neighbours and discuss that. Had a few beers and some sausages and things. So that means no more machining today, but I have started making the front guard stays. These are the rear parts of the stays. What I'm going to do is machine these down so they are a tight press fit into there, and then I'll weld the back. And then these are designed to have a couple of 3/8 bolts that'll go through here, and those will bolt to the chassis somewhere here, and that's where the rear of the front guard will attach. What I've done is machined some high tensile steel. This fits into there. I'm going to weld a nut on here, and there will be a lock bolt that goes through, and I've machined a groove on this. What I will do is machine the end of the bolts so that it fits into that, basically. So this is a 1/4 inch slot, and that should be a nice solid support for the rear guard stays. It's a good fit. So yeah, like I say, I need to turn down the back of these a little bit so that they fit into here. And that's really all I've done on the Riley. For the stays that go at the front, they're going to have to go in here, and what I have for that is, again, I've got my 1/4 inch plate. I'll make a plate that's sort of cut off here, and then I have this square steel bar. I will cut off sections of this, and this will be drilled. I believe the originals might actually be tapered, and that guard stay that comes down has a slight taper on it and then a threaded end so that it sort of fits into this and then gets done up with a nut so it's nice and tight. I may do something like that. I don't think it really needs to be tapered. I think I could just do a hole that's drilled through, and then for the actual stay I'll fit like a threaded insert that gets welded into the end. I'm also using thick wall tubing for the guard stays, so hopefully they won't be too floppy, and I'll probably make the guards from aluminium, and I'll just line the inside of them with something so they're not damaged by stones and so on. That's pretty much the plan at the moment. Should mention quickly that obviously I machine these up on my lathe having a small lathe like this, it's better than having no lathe, but it can be really annoying trying to make things on a tiny lathe, just because you don't have the rigidity or the power there. So to machine down something like this actually takes me quite a while, because you can only take fairly small cuts, and especially trying to do something like this groove where I'm using a fairly flat sort of tool. The little lathes just aren't really very good at that. You can only take very, very light cuts, so everything takes forever. One day I wouldn't mind getting a bigger lathe, because then doing stuff like this is much, much easier. This is 4140 high tensile steel, so it's reasonably tricky to cut it. But I think once these are machined up, pressed into there and welded from the back, they're not going to go anywhere. Just finished up a small job tonight that I couldn't do on the weekend because we went out, which was I finished turning up these pins and I've welded them to the little base plates. I actually made these I think it was 3/4 inch hole, and I made them a push fit, and I used my little hydraulic press to press them almost all the way in. I left about a 2 or 3 mil gap at the bottom. I used a couple of washers to leave a space there, and then I filled the space up with weld and then machined it off. I didn't try to get it too perfect there. It's going to be bolted on, so you don't really notice that. And those should work fairly well, I hope. So the guard stays will go on there. There'll be a nut welded to there with a lock bolt. And that should be enough to hold the back of the rear guards in place, the back of the front guards in place rather. So these will sit basically somewhere like that. Probably where it's flattest. It's one of the other reasons I didn't bother trying to get the bottom too flat, because the chassis rail isn't flat. So I think they go in about there, something like that anyway. It should be, this is all hollow of course, or C-section, so there's room in there. Just have to make sure it clears the steering arm, but there's plenty of room in there. So that'll go on there like that, something like that, and that just gets bolted on 3/8 inch bolts. So I really made sure I got a decent weld on those. So I cranked up the heat on the welder and the speed, got a good pull of weld in, so those are never going to go anywhere. And of course I forgot that it takes ages for these things to cool down. So even though I'd left it for quite a long time, I'd actually gone back inside and come back out, and then I went and picked one up and it was still hot. So that's why I've got the icy cold cider is for medicinal purposes, to put on my finger where I burned it. But that's good. That's the front rear mounts done. I now need to figure out how I'm going to do the front mounts, which are the ones with the block. What I did for these is I actually drew them up in Fusion 360. I did a little CAD drawing just so I knew what I was making, really. I didn't necessarily use the drawing to get the dimensions. I just wanted to visualize what they were going to look like, and so these are pretty close to those drawings.